Hello and welcome to the WinUI Community Call. My name is Gabby and I'll be your host for today. I'm a product manager on the WinUI and Windows App SDK team. So a little bit about the Community Call. This takes place on the third Wednesday of every month at 1600 UTC, which is 9 a.m. Pacific time. Our next call will be on November 16th. You can reach out to us on GitHub at Microsoft UI XAML or Windows App SDK. We're also available on Twitter with the @WindowsUI handle. We also use hashtag WinAppSDK for more info. So here's a little bit of info about WinUI. We show this slide at every call. If you're new to the call, definitely take a look. Afterwards, re-record all of our calls so you can take a look and pause. Our agenda for today. So we are joined by JP from the Widgets team to chat about how you can create third-party widgets for your app using Windows App SDK. We also have Mano on from CSWinRT to chat a bit about IL trimming. I'll also give some updates about Windows App SDK and WinUI, and then as always, we'll lead into Q&A. Let's see, so first up, we'll have JP to chat a bit about widgets for third-party apps. Hi, JP. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well, Gabby. Thanks for having me on the call.
Awesome. So tell us a bit more about widgets for 3P.
Absolutely. So I'll start by first introducing widgets here for people that might be unfamiliar with it. Widgets are small UI containers that were first introduced in Windows 11. They can be found in the Windows 11 widgets board. And in order to access the widgets, you can either click on the bottom left of your screen as shown in this slide, or you can hit the Windows plus W shortcut. Keep in mind that this is available for Windows 11, so you won't be able to see these on Windows 10. Widgets are also glanceable and actionable, and we've included documentation for widgets in aka.ms/widget docs. Now, a little bit about the third-party widgets platform that was introduced in the WinAppSDK 1.2 Preview 2 release. So previously, widgets, when they were first introduced in Windows 11, they only allowed first-party apps to be on the widgets board. Our team has been working on what we call the third-party widgets platform. And what this third-party widgets platform does is allow your apps to be displayed on the widgets board as well. The UI for these widgets is powered by adaptive cards. And as I mentioned before, the first preview of this platform is available in the Windows App SDK 1.2 Preview 2. Now, since this is a preview release, there are a couple of prerequisites that need to be met. So the first one is you need to have a packaged Win32 app. We will be adding support for PWAs coming later in the year. You must also be in the latest dev channel build of the Windows Insider Preview. Your system must have developer mode turned on. And of course, your app must also reference the Windows App SDK 1.2 Preview 2. Right now, with this preview release, developers are able to locally test widgets on their machines if they meet all of these prerequisites. Later on in a future release, widgets will be able to be acquired with your app if the app is obtained through the Microsoft Store. And if you want to learn more about getting your system set up with all of these prerequisites and all the steps necessary to create widgets, you can head over to aka.ms/widget-devdocs. Now, how to create Win32 widgets. So they are three high-level steps to creating a Win32 widget. The first one is designing your widget. The UI for the widget is powered by adaptive cards. The second step is to implement the iWidget provider interface, and this interface is what defines the methods that communicate your app with the widgets board. And then the final step is to register your widget by making some updates to the package manifest, and this will allow your widget to actually display on the widgets board. And as I mentioned, documentation for all of these steps is available at aka.ms/widget-devdocs. Now, here's a little more of a visual example of 3 steps that take place when you actually create the widget. So as I mentioned, the first step is to actually create the UI for your widget. We can see here that the UI was created for what is a weather app. We created with adaptive cards the UI for this widget. And then the second step is to establish the communication between your app and the widgets board. And this is done via the iWidget provider interface, which has 6 main methods that you need to declare and create in order for the widget to communicate. These are create widget, delete widget. These are called when when the user pins or unpins the widget from the widgets board. There's also on action invoked. Anytime the user clicks on the widget or takes an action on the widget that's supposed to interact with your app, this is the method that should be called. On widget context changed is called anytime the user changes the size of the widget. Small, medium, and large are the 3 supported sizes for the widgets board currently. And then activate and deactivate are called whenever the widgets board is interested or not interested in receiving future updates for your widget. And then I will start with a demo here. Okay, so hopefully you all are able to see my screen. I'm starting from the first step here. Remember, there are 3 high-level steps to creating your widget. The first one is to actually design your widget using adaptive cards. In order to do this, you can head over to adaptivecards.io and click on our designer tool. This designer tool will allow users to drag and drop elements into the canvas, and we have one that represents the widgets board right here. So we have the one for the small widget. We're actually going to work with a large widget. We can delete all these elements here. And something good about adaptive cards is that the UI is JSON. So we'll see later on in the demo, once I actually get to the code, that we just have the JSON for the widget in our app, and that's the widget that's going to get displayed on the widgets board. So for this demo, we're going to create a counting widget, and I'm going to go ahead and do that, just dragging in some text blocks here, and I can edit the text. Oh, I actually dragged an input, sorry about that. Text block, that's what I wanted. So we can label this counting widget demo, for example, and then go in here into the element properties and edit things like the style. For example, if we want it to be a heading, we can also make it bold, and let's go ahead and center that as well. Then we can go ahead and add the text for this counter has been incremented. Okay. What this variable does right here for the counting variable is this will allow us to actually increment the counter on the widget by using data binding. So another thing that's supported by adaptive cards is data binding, where you can have your data payload here. And if I were to set this text, for example, to be $title, it would grab the title from here and display it here. So it allows you to interact with your app in that way. Real quick, let me make sure I got the syntax for that count variable correct here. It's actually using curly braces, so we can fix that right here. And you can edit the JSON for your widget using the text editor, as well as dragging the elements straight onto the canvas. And then the final thing we're going to add is an action into the widget itself. So you can add here, add an action.execute. This is what we're going to be using to actually increment the count variable that we just declared here. We can go ahead and center this action, change the title to display increment. And one of the ways we're going to link this action with our app in order to be able to identify what button the user pressed is by using this verb. So we're going to go ahead and call that inc. And I'll show this in the code once we actually get to that part as well. And there we go. So once we hit preview mode, we can see how the widget will look like in the widgets board. If I click increment that right here, we can see that the action.execute was called. Nothing is actually happening because we don't have any logic to actually increment this counting variable, but this is going to be handled by our app. Now, this takes care of the first step for creating just the UI of your widget. This is very simple UI. The second step is actually implementing the iWidget provider interface. So if we head over to aka.ms/widget devdocs, you'll be taken to this page for the widget providers. You can head over here to the implement a widget provider in a Win32 app, where if you follow all the steps, you'll end up with the code that I'm about to share as part of this demo. I'm not going to waste your time and go through every single step here, but I will share some important steps here as part of the demo. So in the documentation, we'll guide you to implementing all of these files, and you'll end up with a very similar widget that I'm going to show here. We'll guide you to creating the widget provider header file, the widget provider CPP file that has all the logic for updating your widget, displaying the widget, and communicating with the widgets board. And one of the important parts of this widget provider here is actually in the onAction invoked. So remember, I mentioned that this onAction invoked method is called anytime the user interacts with an action on the widget. In our example, the action is the increment button. So anytime the user clicks on this increment button, if the verb for the widget is, or for the verb for the action is inc, we're going to go ahead and increment the counter right here and then update the widget to display the new UI. We can see that the JSON, or the template for our widget, is found in our widget provider header file. This is the JSON that we created in the previous step. It has a couple of more elements added, like conditional text blocks, which I will get into as well. But following the tutorial in aka.ms/widget devdocs will guide you through all the steps necessary here, as well as just setting up your system in order to get this up and running. Another important step is the last one, which is registering your widget. In order to do that, you can head over to your main method, and you're going to have to create what's called a GUID for your application. You can go ahead and do that by clicking on Tools, Create GUID. You select the third option, hit Copy, and then you can just paste it right here. We've already done that. We have one right here, but I just wanted to demonstrate that you will need this GUID in order to register your widget with the widgets board. You're going to go ahead and copy this. And if we look at the documentation that we have as part of the last steps here, we show you where these changes need to be made in the Apex manifest right here, which is in XML. So we can see that you add it right here in this class ID, and you also add it, might be easier, look at it in the code window here. So if I go right here, package manifest, I hit view code, I can see that that GUID string is added into this class ID field right here, and it is also added to this other class ID field. We have the format for this XML that your widget needs also in the documentation. We include all the details for the element hierarchy and all these different properties like provider icons, what they are they required, widget capabilities, like which sizes your widget will support. The counting widget that we're going to show will support small, medium, and large sizes. And we also have the icons and the screenshots. Another important thing to note is that these properties for icons and screenshots are required. And if they are not included, then the widget will fail to render in the widgets board. So once we have all the setup done and ready, we can just go over to our provider package and hit deploy. We'll wait for this to finish deploying, give it a couple seconds. It always takes long when it's a live demo, but I do have a backup video in case this does not go as expected. Okay, we can see that the deployment succeeded here. And now if we either click on the bottom left right here or hit the Windows plus W shortcut, we'll open up the widgets board, and you won't be able to immediately see the third-party widget. What you have to do is go over to the widget picker here and then add your widget to the widget board like so. So I went ahead and added the widget. As we can see, it popped up right here. We can go ahead and open it again. We can see that it's still here. We can see that we can click on the increment button and it increments the variable and the state is preserved. So if I head out to the code, reopen the widgets board, we can see that the counting variable is right there. We can also see that we take advantage of what we call host properties. If we see the JSON for this one, we can see that we have a conditional. We have more information on conditionals in the Adaptive Cards website that I shared earlier, but what this is basically doing is it's rendering this text block only if this condition is met. So if the widget's size is small, then it will render this text block. As we can see here, the widget size is medium, so it's rendering the text block for medium. But if we go ahead and change the size, we can see that the text block has changed to say rendering only if large. And this is useful in case you want your widget to display different information based on the different sizes, which should be happening. If you have a large widget, you will want to show more content on it than if you had a medium widget, for example. We can see that the counting still works with this increment variable here. And it is preserved as well, even if we close the widgets board. And that's it for the demo that I have to share. I do want to encourage folks that attend this call, if you can please go ahead and self-host this preview of third-party widgets. Let us know your thoughts in the WinAppSDK repo. We'll be there listening to feedback as well as answering any questions that you have if you're self-hosting this platform. Thank you so much for having me, Gabby.
Awesome. Thank you, JP. Thanks for sharing. It's great to see all of the different things you can do with widgets. Next up, before we move on to the next feature, I'm going to have Chris on. Hi, Chris. To answer a question quickly about Win2D. So a question that we got from GitHub was, when will Win2D finally get feature parity in WinUI 3.0 with its UWP version?
So yeah, thanks for the question. I can give an update here. For the past year, we've been focusing on trying to refactor Win2D to provide a different layering strategy. And to be honest, that work hasn't trended towards something that we were happy with. So we recently actually pivoted our focus on Win2D to coming back to not changing the code very much, but trying to close those feature gaps. So we are actually actively working on this. Our focus right now is making sure our test infrastructure is online and working well so that we don't break things. And so I don't have a date right now, but I can give an update, hopefully the next talk on the progress that we're making. And I can confirm that closing that feature gap is actually our focus now in Win2D.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, for sharing. It's a great update.
Thank you.
Perfect. And with that, our next topic is about IL trimming. So hi, Mano. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Hey, Gabby.
Good. Hey, perfect. So you're going to give a little bit of an overview. I'll go ahead with the slides.
Hey, folks. My name is Madhav Singaraja. I'm a software engineer on the CS1IT team. So today I'm going to be talking to you about IL trimming for .NET apps. IL trimming is a feature that was added it's a .NET feature that is supported for .NET 6 applications, which WinAppSDK added support for in 1.2 Preview 2 and CS1IT 2.0. In this feature, basically, .NET will statically analyze your entire application and determine which portion of the code is actually used and which portions are not used. So for instance, let's say your app consumes a couple of different libraries, and you use a single API from each one of these libraries, but each one of these libraries has numerous different functions. .NET will be able to statically analyze this application and all the libraries it consumes, determines for the managed boundaries which ones have access unused code that the app is not using at all. And for all of this unused code, if the libraries have been marked trimmable, .NET will trim all of those unused code away when you publish the app. Then result of is that when you publish your app with trimming enabled, .NET will trim all of these unused code away and resulting in app size improvements where your app might have been 100 megabytes before, but could be small as 10 megabytes based on how much of the unused code was trimmed away. For instance, with WinUI Gallery, when we enabled trimming for it, we saw a 45% disk footprint improvement. One of the big binaries inside of it is the Windows SDK projection, which you may also see in your own apps if you have a .NET WinAppSDK app. With ready to run enabled, that binary is about 50 megabytes today. With trimming enabled, WinUI Gallery saw that binary go down all the way down to 1.8 megabytes. Similarly, with a regular Hello World app, we saw the Windows SDK projection go down to less than a megabyte, where it was only a couple of kilobytes in size. So based on how much code is unused and what is used in your app, we'll trim the unused code away, basically. So how do you use IO trimming with WinAppSDK? First of all, you will need 1.2 Preview 2, because that is the first feature we added trimming support for. In your publish profile, if you're using one of the default publish profiles today, you will see that publish trimmed is commented out. You should be able to uncomment that out or set that publish trim to true, which will enable trimming for your application. And then once you publish your app, either creating MSIX or using the .NET Publish feature, you may get some trim warnings. And this is .NET warning you of anything that might not be trim friendly or limitations for trimming that you might be using. For instance, reflection is a common scenario that comes up as a warning when you're using trimming. So with reflection, if you're using reflection on trimmable types, .NET might not be able to actually statically analyze that you're using reflection here and you're calling these functions. So it may actually end up trimming those types. And then when you run your app at runtime, you may actually run into exceptions such as missing method exception, where when you use reflection to call that function, .NET doesn't end up finding it because it has already been trimmed away. So either you could adjust your code to no longer rely on reflection in these scenarios, or you could use one of the solutions that .NET has added support for to make it statically aware of the usage of reflection, such as the dynamic accessible members attribute, which I'll show a bit later in my demo. Another thing area is built-in comment drop. .NET does have built-in comment drop separate from COM wrappers and CS1RT, where with its built-in comment drop, it is by default disabled in trimming due to limitations that it has. It is possible to enable it, but there's certain scenarios with it that it may not work. But you should be able to use something like CS1RT or COM wrappers or so on as a projection with the comment drop, which will still work. Another thing, as you mentioned, is when you do trim your app, you should make sure that you totally test your app because it could result in unexpected types getting trimmed if .NET didn't manage to statically analyze that you're using a certain type, or even behavior changes if there were certain behavior changes from certain types going away that impacted how your app behaves. So you should totally test your app, look out for any runtime errors, such as type load exceptions, missing method exceptions, and not supported exceptions. Another thing I should call out is, if you have your own WinRT component and you ship your own CS1RT projection for it, you may want to consider enabling trimming for that. Depending on how big the binary size is, it may help any consumers of your library. To do that, you will need to adopt CS1RT 2.0 in order to build your CS1RT projection for your WinRT component and add the is-trimmable property to your component projection project. After that, any consumers of your CS1RT projection will get the trimming benefit that CS1RT 2.0 provides. So now for a quick demo to show some of these stuff that I discussed. So here I have a sample app. I already moved it to .NET 6, and I already have a package reference to WinAppSDK 1.2 Preview 2. So in my publish profile that I have here on the right side, there's one for each architecture, and based on which architectures you use, you should update one of those. As I mentioned earlier, today the publish trim in the default profile template that you get is commented out. You could uncomment that out, or here I'm just going to copy paste it out. So now I have publish trim enabled for the x64 publishing. And I have basically a pretty blank app with a button. And the button basically calls the file picker APIs here that you can see. And I'm using initialize with window.initialize to initialize the window and then call and pick single file async. And then basically I get a file name and set the button's content to the file name. Couple of things first I want to call out is, so some of our previous solutions for initializing a window relied on common port interfaces, where you would define your own common port interfaces, then you would QI for it and use that to call initialize. Since this uses common port, this isn't actually trim friendly, as the built-in common drop, as I mentioned earlier, is disabled by default. But CS1RT does now support WinRT.interrupt initialize window without initialize natively. So the CS1RT version of this is trim friendly, and you will be able to use that for the same scenario in a trim friendly way. Another thing I should call out, I mentioned, is the usage of reflection. So I have a function called getWindowProperty, and what it does today is it gets a type variable, and it will call type.getField, get the mWindow field, and then it will get the value for it for the given target. So this, if I were to build this right now, while that is building, I actually commented here what the message you will get is, but basically you will get a message saying that you have a trim analysis warning saying that getWindowProperty is not actually trim friendly, and it will say that it doesn't meet the requirements of dynamically accessible member type non-public fields that is indicated by type.getFields. Basically saying that type.getField has been marked by .NET as using dynamically accessible members, and your function does not declare that. So if I were to declare that on my type instance that I passed here, that I had comp.rk, you see here, had dynamic access members saying that I access non-public fields, this will let .NET know that statically that I am actually using non-public fields dynamically. And when .NET does an analysis of my applications, we will statically determine that. So when I call a getWindowProperty, .NET will see that I'm passing type of app, and it will then observe that I'm going to be dynamically accessing non-public fields. So when it does the static analysis, it will know that any non-public field should be kept for the app type. So now I already went ahead and built and did a publish of both before I trimmed and after I trimmed. And we could take a look at how those binaries look like. Let me bring that up. So on the left-hand side, we have basically 1.0.3, which is my non-trimmed version of the app. On the right-hand side, we have 1.0.4, which is the trimmed version of this app. To start off, I could look at the size. So this folder itself, which is the non-trimmed version, is about 123 megabytes. And if I looked at a trimmed version of this app, it is about 24 megabytes. So you can see that there's a significant improvement already with the trimmed version. Now, if I look at a couple of different binaries here, so you can see the Windows SDK projection is about 40 megabytes here. You can see the WinUI projection is about 12 megabytes. And you see a bunch of other different projections that are distributed from WinAppSDK that are inside of your bin folder or your apps folder. And now on the right-hand side, which is a trimmed version, I could see that I see the Windows SDK projection, but it's no longer 40 megabytes as we saw here. It is about 388 kilobytes. So only the types that were used by my app were actually kept. Everything else was trimmed away. Similarly with the WinUI projection, it used to be about 12 megabytes. It is now 528 kilobytes. And you can see that the number of binaries that were on the left-hand side is much more less now on the right-hand side. This is because all of the other projections, .NET was able to detect that they are unused, and it just didn't even keep the binaries. It just trimmed the binaries entirely away. So you could see that by enabling trimming, you could get significant app size improvements for your app based on how much types that you actually use from the consuming projections. So my ask is to try out trimming with your applications. If you run into any issues where you might be trimming CS1RT types that should not have been trimmed, file it as soon as CS1RT repo with a repro, and we could take a look and figure out why those are trimmed. Otherwise, try out this feature and give us feedback.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby.
Let's see. It's great to have you on. Next up, I want to share a bit of news about WinUI and WinAppSDK. So first up is recently, as you've heard from the last couple of demos, we have released WinAppSDK 1.2 Preview 2 on October 4th. So this contains third-party widgets in Windows, as you saw with JP, drumming for apps developed in .NET, as you saw with Nano, display information APIs, which are for HDR apps, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in the 1.2 features, as well as additional bug fixes in WinUI 3, having acrylic support in Win 10, some fixes for app.onHandle exception, which we'll talk about as well during the Q&A, as well as fixing some regressions in list view styles, and more. So check out the full release notes at that AKMS link or our release channels. I'll also note that for building C# apps, with the change to CS1RT 2.0, Visual Studio 2022 and .NET 6 is now required. So just a note as you're trying that out, and that will be the case for 1.2 stable as well. So for features for WinAppSDK 1.2, as we're slowly getting there, actually it's rapidly approaching. We are getting there, and it's rapidly approaching. Those capabilities include, as I've said before, WinUI 3 apps can play audio video with media playback controls, support for dynamic refresh rate, which switches between 60 Hertz and 120 Hertz automatically. WinUI 3 controls styles behavior up to date with WinUI 2.8. Widgets in Windows 11 devices, as you saw. Support for the upcoming .NET 7 release, as well as support for building ARM64 apps on the upcoming Visual Studio ARM64 release on those native devices, as well as the display information API, as I mentioned. So this API allows you to observe and query info on system displays and have support for HDR. There's additional updates, which include app window title bar, down level to Win 10 1809, 11% runtime size reduction in 1.2 from WinAppSDK 1.15 on x64. So that makes it so your app is smaller if running self-contained and generally makes things more performant. As well as RTL support and WinUI 3 title bar. And as mentioned in the previous demo, that app size reduction for C# apps published with IL trimming. And there'll be more, as you've been seeing in our release notes. So our full release notes will contain all of the changes that have occurred in WinAppSDK 1.2. So looking forward to that. And so just more info about those upcoming releases. We're aiming to release the stable version in about 2 weeks, aiming for November 1st. But as always, this is targeted and may change. So if November 1st comes around and it's not quite there yet, don't worry, we're working on it. After that, we'll begin our feature planning cycle, which starts with our release cycle starts with WinAppSDK 1.3 experimental, those features in early stages of development, and then to previews, and then to a stable release. So our stable release is we're aiming for March of 2023. That may change as time goes on, but about, I think that's 6 months from now-ish, is our next stable release. And as always, we also will have additional servicing releases, now focusing on 1.2 branch on the second Tuesday of every month and as needed. And with that, we will move to Q&A. So our Q&A, let's get everybody on. Hello, hello, hello. Let's see, I have almost everybody on, but we'll swap out as well. I know we can only have about 9. Let's see. So I know our questions, we've been gathering them we had some issues on our end, but Savoy, do you think we might be ready with a question as we continue to manage it?
Yeah, I can figure it out. We haven't seen, our any shortage of technical difficulties before, so make it
just
work.
so folks on the call know, we collect up all the questions that we've seen on GitHub and then also in YouTube in a spreadsheet that we all edit together live, and that spreadsheet 5 minutes ago just went down and nobody can access it. So,
Yeah.
we're trying to recover it.
You know what? I think I think we got it figured out here. Let's start with the question for Darren. Is Darren with us?
Yeah, let me throw them on. Yeah, just a second. Oh, we can do more. Awesome. Let's have everyone on. Hi, Darren.
It's actually
Awesome.
looking up the issues on GitHub because it seems like the links in the spreadsheet are broken. So this will be fun. I just got on and Gabby's like, "Can you join the call?" I'm like, why not? So I'm here now. Hello, everyone.
All right. So, Darren, a question for you that does come from GitHub. Balkoth was asking, when will restart API be in a working condition down level 220 H1?
This is gonna sound really bad as a Microsoft employee. I'm sorry. That's Vibranium, right? Is that? I don't know. So, oh my God, if this is the issue about the restart API just generally not working, where it just fails. 1 second. I have the. Do you know the issue number?
Let me see. There's two that were referenced, 2792 and 2863.
Okay, I think this is the restart issue. Yeah, restart API not working with unpacked steps in 1.1.3. This is the one I've been working on. Good news, actually. Okay, yeah. Okay. Yes, okay. Good news on this one. So we did find out what was going on. Turns out in 21H2, what happens is any app in the framework, any process, any executable or anything you can launch in a framework package starts with low IL, not medium IL. So if the medium IL process starts a process that's living in a framework package, it's going to start low IL no matter what. And how the restart API works is press restart. This is a very jumpy process. It's press restart button or do something, call restart. It calls restart agent.exe, which is inside the framework package for Windows App SDK. The app shuts down. Restart agent.exe has all the handle and security information. It basically just calls the process again to start. The issue is because since the restart agent is in the framework package, even if the app started as medium IL as the user, it gets launched as low IL, which then launches the process as low IL, and then in DDLM, it goes, hey, let me check for any package capabilities, and because it's low IL, it crashes. That is being serviced. That bug, that platform issue with the ACLs is being serviced. I got an email literally today at 7:05 in the morning. No, different one. I got an email today at 3:43 p.m. on. I can't read my email anymore. Wow, I'm just not. There we go. I got it at sometime 18th. Yesterday. So that the bug at the ACLs causing this issue will be serviced. It's most likely not going to be serviced until February, though. But it is in the servicing pipeline, and this issue will eventually be fixed in 21H2. So that's what's going on, and it is going to be fixed. It should be, unless something drastically bad happens. But I'm like 99% sure. I will pinky swear on it, actually. That's the answer.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. Let's see. I'll grab a question here for Scott from GitHub. Atif Mahir is asking, any news on supporting native AOT on Windows App SDK? This can really solve startup performance and overall performance issues. Hoping it can be as good as UWP.
Well, and I in turn am going to pass that along to Mano, who is definitely the subject matter expert. But before I do, I did want to follow up on Mano's talk on IL trimming. 2 points there. Somebody in the chat, I forget who it was, asked about bindings, and that is a concern that the potential exists for a binding, that is to say not an X bind, but a dynamic binding, which uses reflection to access to reference some artifact in the code that might otherwise be trimmed, shouldn't be trimmed. So it turns out that that's actually a fairly fringe case, somewhat unlikely, given the fact that app code by default is excluded from trimming. But we do have a couple of gaps to cover like that. So that we'll be coming back to that probably in the servicing release. And then the other point I wanted to make on publish trimmed, as well as publish ready to run, these are expensive operations. And so you probably want to turn those off for debug and keep them on for release. You can do that in your publish profile using a condition, just like you would in MS Build. Condition configuration equals release, make it true. Condition configuration equals debug, make it false. And I just did that for another customer the other day and cut their build time from 90 seconds to 30 in debug builds. So do make sure you only have those turned on for release. Okay, so for native AOT, I'm going to pass that off to Mano to address that.
So for the question of native AOT, we've been working on CS1.T support for native AOT. There's a couple of different gaps that we have, specifically around generic interfaces, that we are working on addressing to make it AOT compatible. Once we get that working, we'll be looking at trying out WinAppSDK with native AOT and see where we stand, if there's any other gaps, and so on, and working and building on top of that. And eventually, hopefully, once we address all of these gaps, we will be able to ship a version that does support native AOT. But I don't have exact timeline right now on when that's going to be able, but we're making progress on that, is what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Let's see. I'll grab a few more from GitHub while we continue to collect our question sheet here. Scott, another question for you. K563 is asking, can we have an update, please, on the status of app unhandled exception doesn't catch exceptions? It's a nasty bug which causes an app to silently quit if an exception is thrown and not handled locally.
Yes, folks, my apologies on this. Steve and Artur and everybody else that's been waiting patiently for a complete fix for this. This is turning into a journey, unfortunately. So we will get this fixed. We will get this fixed in the first opportunity, which is the servicing release 1.2.1. The ship has sailed for 1.2, unfortunately, and the remaining work that needs to be done to cover synchronous callbacks from the framework into user code is going to require an update to the Microsoft Windows Net SDK projection, which is distributed as part of the .NET SDK, as well as changes to the Windows App SDK and C# WinRT. In other words, there are several moving parts here to cover the last bit, the last mile. But it is a priority. We'll get it done, and hopefully early December. I don't have a firm timeline on a servicing release. I was just talking about this with Bob. He might have some additional information, but as soon as we can, we'll get this into a servicing release.
I would just add there, as far as the timing of this, that we are going through, we understand the pressure to get 1.2 stable out, but that a lot of people want to start deploying apps on this and actually putting it into the store, and we want to get that in. And we're trying to balance that with some of the bug fixes. So there's the unhandled exception bug that Scott mentioned. There's the bug with Mica being used in backdrops is another one that we have on the servicing list. So we've got a number of these bugs, and we want to get stable out as quickly as possible. We are then looking to find the right timing for the first servicing drop based on just getting some of these high-profile fixes and getting those into your hands as quickly and reliably as we can.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Scott. Ryan, a question for you. PubTom is asking, will we be able to use WinUI 3 and WinAppSDK to develop for Xbox and HoloLens and etc.?
Yeah, good question. I get this question a lot too. And so one action item that I'm going to take here is make sure that we have like a really clear spot that we can have people go and reference this. But the answer is no, we're not planning on supporting Xbox or HoloLens, at least for the foreseeable future, perhaps forever. We're going to be focused on Windows desktop development.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. We've had a few questions in the chat for JP. JP, folks are asking specifically, Bruno FPA, are there any C# WinUI samples for creating third-party widgets?
That's a good question, Bruno. Right now, there isn't. Our team is working on supporting this as soon as possible. So as soon as we have an update on C# third-party widgets, I'll go ahead and make an update either in the WinAppSDK repo. It'll most likely come in a future release. Right now, there isn't support for C#, but it is something our team is working to support very soon.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, JP. Let's see what else we have going on here. Mano Dasan, you were presenting on trimming properties earlier, and Arthur is asking, how will trimming avoid trimming properties used in binding XYZ?
Scott answered that question previously already.
Oh, he covered that. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. All right, let's see what else we have here. Let's see. I feel like we've actually been covering most of the questions in chat. There have been, I know we answered this there, but it might be worth saying out loud. A few folks were asking the ETA for WinAppSDK 1.2. Ryan, Gabby, did we have a date on that?
Yeah. 1.2 is aiming for November 1st. So it's either going to be November 1st or it's going to be right around then.
Awesome. Thank you. A question for Mike. Mike, you'll have a few in a row here. TEH173 was asking, one second here, my sheet just lagged. Oh, there it is. Touchpad behavior. Will this be fixed in the stable release of 1.2? There appear to be regressions compared to 1.1.
I don't have a direct answer to it. I've been away for a little bit and need to get caught up. But I just want to say on this one, thanks for opening up the issues. If you're seeing regressions in 1.2, that's why we put the experimental and preview releases out. It's really high priority not to cause regressions. So like I say, thanks for opening up the issues, and I'll be following up on those today and see where we're at, and I'll use the issue to post back.
Awesome. Sweet, Mike. One more on the subject of regressions. Oh, sorry, it was actually IHAK who asked the last one and this one as well, pointed out that compared to using WinUI 2 XAML islands, the composition of UI content with swap chain or system backdrop does not work. Any time frame on when it'd be possible to use those again?
I'm not positive what this is referring to. The fundamentally interesting thing, I think maybe we've talked about before about swap chains between WinUI 2 and WinUI 3. In WinUI 2, we're building up a system visual tree. In WinUI 3, we're building up an in-proc visual tree that gets rendered to a single system visual for the most part. If you use a swap chain panel control in XAML, that goes on to a second system visual, and then we punch a hole. We punch a hole in the primary visual so that you can see the swap chain system visual underneath it. And so that causes some differences in behavior between WinUI 2 and WinUI 3. For example, if you have some transparency on the swap chain, that's not going to show through what's behind it since they're on separate system visuals. So I think that's what this is referring to. And it's not just swap chains. The new media player element has the same kind of behavior. It's the same underlying technology. And we have some initial design ideas for how we could make it more like WinUI 2, but it's not something that we're actively working on right now, so I don't have any kind of a time frame.
All right, thanks, Mike. Question for JP here. Was that Marcel? Someone here was asking, will apps be able to have more than one widget?
Yes, I believe that was Diego in the chat here.
Yes,
and apps will be able to have more than one widget. The example we have over at ak.ms/widget devdocs has two widgets. It has the counting widget that I shared as part of the demo, and it also has a weather widget. So that's an example of an app supporting two widgets.
Sweet. Thank you, JP. Ryan, nuanced question here. So we spoke a little bit to Xbox support earlier, but PubTom is asking specifically on the subject of WebView 2 in WinUI 2, and is curious if support for that will happen on Xbox.
Awesome. Yeah. I saw that post actually on our GitHub issue, PubTom, and I'm working on a reply because it was a two-part question. You wanted to also get the status of, I think it was 5299, and I'm still working on that status. So I'll write back to the GitHub issue, but for the benefit of everyone, I think it's worthwhile talking just for a second about sort of how WebView 2 is created. So there's basically two parts to WebView 2. There's a core WebView 2 engine that our Edge team creates and produces. And then UX frameworks like WinUI take that core engine and they wrap up that capability into a control that is native and specific to the UX framework. So in the case of WinUI 2 and WinUI 3, that's angle bracket WebView 2. And the Edge team is going to be bringing the. I realize that this can be confusing. The Edge team is going to be bringing WebView 2 to Xbox, the core engine. So that core engine capability will be there. And the question being asked by PubTom is, are we going to, effectively the question is, are we going to be adding support for angle bracket WebView 2 in WinUI 2 because that new engine capability is available on Xbox? And the answer to that is no. And the reason it's no is because we're done releasing new releases of WinUI 2. So WinUI 2 is entering a bug fixing only mode. We're really only going to be supporting it with like servicing fixes. And so we're not planning to service a new pretty profound capability like that. So that's hopefully that explains not only the answer but why. Hopefully that's useful, PubTom.
Thanks, Ryan. A question for maybe Mike, maybe Scott. Marcel is asking, is there any update on Visual Studio and Hot Reload not liking the new grid row/column definitions?
Yeah, I just saw that Ryan identified the issue 7549 on that, which is great. And I just sent a note off to the original developer of this work to see what the status of this is. It may be that there's a fix already available and we just need to upgrade. Obviously, it's an out-of-date XAML parser. That's the problem. So I'll try to track this down and get an answer, which I'll post to the issue.
Gotcha. Okay, we are getting near the bottom of the barrel for questions here. So might grab a few that we may or may not be ready to answer here live on the call. Mike, this is maybe for you. TEH173 noted that XAML Islands is listed as experimental on the roadmap. And they ask, what does that mean? Are there samples demonstrating usage, C# or C++? What's its current status, and is it in a state to provide feedback?
I think yes on the samples. I can't remember for sure. I'd have to look. We've got different release channels, which I think you noticed here. We've got the experimental, the preview, and the stable. It's what we used to call alpha, beta, and GA. So in the experimental release channel, we have APIs that are very unstable. We're still trying to get feedback on them, and that's the state of XAML Islands right now. So XAML Islands is in the experimental channel. We did a release of experimental in August, I think, so pretty recently. And so the XAML Islands APIs in there are yes in a form where we would love feedback on them. There's two levels of XAML Islands APIs. At the lower level, there's the desktop Windows XAML source. Desktop Windows XAML source, it's a long name. And then in WinUI 2, that is wrapped by a WPF control for use in WPF apps, and it's wrapped by a WinForms control that's used in WinForms apps. And those are still a little work, but they're a lot easier to use than the underlying desktop Windows XAML source. All we have right now in the experimental channel is that underlying desktop Windows XAML source. So there's some more work associated with it, but it is in a form where we'd love feedback. And if we don't have sample, I know I've seen some sample code. So if we don't have samples, then maybe that's just something we need to get posted out to the samples repo.
Yeah, we do have samples. So I just went and found
Thanks.
them.
Thank you.
So we have them for, Content Island. So they're in the chat.
Yeah, we talk about content. We're making the terminology distinction between content islands and XAML islands. Content islands is the underlying technology that could be hosting other kinds of content into a visual tree, not just XAML.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Last one I saw come in from GitHub here. Same user was asking, transparency has been requested for a while and has long been supported in WPF. What's the priority of this for WinAppSDK?
I'm not sure where that is on the roadmap either, in terms of priority.
All right. Well, it sounds like something we can continue to discuss on GitHub then. So for okay, I see 2 last-minute questions coming in here. Gabby, Ryan, Wahid is asking, is there any roadmap for version 1.3 yet?
Yeah, I just typed into the YouTube chat, but I can also mention it here. We're aiming for end of March. So the way that we've sort of settled into 6-month cycles. So 1.3 is probably going to be somewhere around end of March. We're in the process of planning it now. So all the feedback that's come in on this call and all the feedback that we get from our various signals and channels are all sort of being put together into building a plan.
Awesome. And I think they were asking less specifically about release date and more about roadmap availability, but it sounds like you answered that in the sense that we're planning it now.
Yeah, we're planning it now. Yeah. We don't have like we know some features. These we like incrementally get confidence on which features will debut. We'll likely have some controls work in there. We're still trying to sort out how far we get on some other areas. So I don't have a whole lot to share, but once we get a sense of like what 1.3 will and won't have, we'll definitely share it on this call. So it'll be coming in a future call as soon as we're ready to share something.
Sweet. And as a follow-up, Wahid asks if we can confirm whether input validation will be a part of the Node 1.3 feature set yet.
Not at this time, and probably not going to be part of 1.3. Realistically, I'd say that's probably trending to be post 1.3. But nothing has been finalized.
All right. And the last question I see here, and it looks like perfect timing to wrap up too, is Sergio is asking if there could be hot reload for Visual C++. Is that a Scott question? Maybe Ryan?
I don't think there can be. Mike can correct me on this. I think that a essential requirement for that is reflection for hot reload. I think that's necessary.
And hot reload is a mix of, there's 2 levels to the hot reload. There's a XAML markup and there's a language, and C# has support for hot reload, which C++ doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for bearing with us while we tried to keep a crisp Q&A with our back-end tools here failing us. So we hope you found it valuable. And as always, if there's a question we missed or something more that you need answered, always feel welcome to post it on our GitHub. We have an issue template designed for discussions. And of course, every month we post our question sheet or a question asking issue for the community call, and we deliver a lot of responses there as well. So I'll turn it back over to Gabby to close out the call. Thanks everyone for asking these questions, and thanks to our team for joining us to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Amor. And thanks everybody for joining, both on the team on the call and in the comments. We really appreciate your questions and comments. It was great to see you this month, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And with that, have a great rest of your day or evening. Bye.